What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We're going to recap week 5, some great matchups that happened this past weekend. Make sure to like and subscribe. We're at 284 on YouTube. 16 people, man, and we get to 300. You guys are the best listeners out there. I appreciate y'all. Let's get this thing to 300. So if you're listening for the first time, if you're listening on Spotify, first of all, follow on Spotify. But then go over to YouTube, smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, get that algorithm going. We are so close to 300, man. So let's get it going. So appreciative of you guys. Follow us on X. Just reached 1,000 on X. So follow me there as well. Instagram, Big Ten Football Talk. And of course, you can always email me at big10footballtalk@gmail.com. So we are excited because this was a heck of a weekend for football. There was a big game in Tuscaloosa. You may have heard about it. It's Georgia, Alabama. I'm not going to talk about that game other than the fact that, Alabama was making light work and then Georgia came back. And then Ryan Williams was one of the best freshman receivers we've ever seen. And we're going to talk about another great freshman receiver. But it certainly is interesting. And we'll probably go back to that data point for the national perspective all season in terms of Georgia and Alabama because of their schedules, because of, how good are these teams really. But I think, it's amazing that we had that game out of conference, but I thought we had some really good games in conference this week. So excited to cover those. That's what I watched as I've watched cut-ups or I watched the whole games of all these games. And we had some good football this weekend. So I'll start with Friday night. Rutgers defeats Washington 21-18. That was on Friday night on Fox. And I think there is a lazy narrative about this game. And the lazy narrative is this, is that Washington put up close to double Rutgers yards. And because of that, it's only because of penalties and because of undisciplined play that Washington won. I think that's a lazy narrative. And here's why. Ethan Kaliak-Manis had the better QBR over Will Rogers. Rutgers was playing with a lead and they played conservatively. And Washington was playing catch up for the entire second half. And so it makes sense that Will Rogers had a bunch of passing yards. If you look at the first half stats, it was fairly even. Rutgers was still down about 30, 40 yards from Washington. Not nearly the disparity that it was. It was ultimately, I believe, 521 to 299 was the yardage breakdown. But I don't think that tells the whole story. Obviously, the undisciplined play tells a lot of the story. But I think the reality is Rutgers played smart, sound, complementary football throughout the game, right? They got ahead 2 scores. They sat on a lead. They said, we're not going to we know who we are. We know what our game plan is, and we're going to stick with it. And the reality is Washington, they may know who they are, but they are undisciplined. And so basically Rutgers said, we know who you are. We know who we are. We're going to make you beat us. We're ahead. We're going to make you drive the field. We're going to make you do this. And they couldn't, whether it was missed field goals, whether it was the penalties, turnovers. Rutgers made Washington beat themselves. And that was smart. They know that Kaliak-Manis is good, not great. They know that he's not going to be an air raid type of guy. They know he's going to be steady. And his average wasn't great. 4.8 yards per attempt. Meh. Okay. But you know what? He converted several key third downs. I was really impressed by Kaliak-Manis in this game. I thought this game and the game past against Virginia Tech, I feel like he's really delivered and done what they've needed him to do. I want to talk a little bit about not Kaliak-Manis, about Kama Nungai and Jonah Coleman. Both those dudes are studs. I don't understand why Jonah Coleman only had 16 carries in this game because he was gashing Rutgers seemingly all night long. Like, I thought Rutgers did a good job of bend but not breaking, but I wonder how much they would have broken if they just kept feeding Jonah the rock. Like, I, I don't understand what Jed Fish is doing. I hope that when he plays against Michigan next week, he realizes he's got maybe one of the best backs in the conference, if not the country. Because this dude is a stud. 16 carries, 148 yards, 39-yard long carry. So I mean, it wasn't one long carry and then that was it. He was consistent. They did a good job. But I don't understand the decision making, taking the ball out of his hands. I thought Denzel Boston had a good game for Washington, 6 catches, 125 yards, 2 touchdowns. But listen, gang, Kyle Monangai, I know a lot of people will say that because of the flash plays, the sizzle plays, that Jeremiah Smith might be the top offensive player right now. I don't know how you don't look at Kyle Monangai as one of the front runners right now. This guy against a good defense, right? Washington's defense is, I think, a legitimately top third defense in the Big Ten. I think it's really good. 25 carries, 132 yards, a touchdown, consistently got them out of bad situations, right? Second half, they're at the 1-yard line. You're thinking, okay, this is where Washington flips the field and maybe starts to take control of this game, get some momentum. Kyle Monangai gets them out of it with like a 40-yard ridiculous run. Gets them out of it. I thought it was a mistake that they punted on 4th and 1. I thought you have maybe the best back in the conference in Monangai. Why not run it there and go for the first down? But I understand what Shiano's thinking. We have the lead. It's a 2-score lead at that point. Let's force Washington to march down the field. So, like, in terms of a game plan perspective, I understand that. In terms of a personnel roster perspective, I'm like, dude, let Monangai be your workhorse. And he was their workhorse. 25 carries, 132 yards. Great. Just great day. Ian Strong at wide receiver continues to be reliable and efficient. 5 catches for 40 yards, a touchdown. I just thought the receiving game, they didn't do great, especially in the second half. But a lot of it was just they were just trying to manage the lead. They knew they wanted to sit on the lead. They trusted their defense. They trusted that Washington would shoot themselves in the foot, and they did that. So overall, I think if Rutgers had to score another touchdown, I think they could have, but I think they chose to sit on the ball. And so for those of you who are looking at the score and be like, well, Rutgers got lucky. I don't know if I agree with that. I think they were evenly matched. I think Washington, from a yardage perspective, looked better on paper, but I think that was the game plan going in. I lean Rutgers next week against Nebraska. And part of that is seeing Nebraska play against Purdue. I think part of it is the reality that I think Rutgers knows who they are and they know their pathway to victory. And I thought they played it to perfection. Washington, on the other hand, I think their roster is really good. Like, I think they are a middle of the pack Big Ten roster, but their lack of discipline makes them a bottom half to bottom third team. And so if they can clean up the penalties, I like them hosting Michigan next week. I really do. But they've got to clean this stuff up, because you know who's going to let them make mistakes and shoot themselves in the foot? Michigan. They have no problem sitting on a lead and running you to death. So Washington, understand, teams in the Big Ten are smart. You got smart teams, smart coaches, and teams that can run the ball and take the air out of the ball. You've got to clean this up if you want to win games in this conference and in this league. So big win for Washington, 4-0 for the first time since 2012. Really, really good job. And they go in next week with a lot of confidence going to Lincoln for another big road game and a chance to go 5-0. We're going to move to the noon games on Saturday. So the noon games The first one we'll talk about. Sorry, I got a little distracted here. Not noon. I don't know which noon. It doesn't say here what the noon games were. So my apologies. I was about to go into noon and it had Oregon UCLA first, and that was not a noon game. That was past my bedtime. We'll talk about Oregon and UCLA. We'll talk about Big Ten after dark. I'll just go opposite. Sure. I thought Oregon clearly was the better team. I think we knew that. I think we knew it was going to be tough. UCLA offensively did not do much in this game, right? 7 of their points was a pick six of Dylan Gabriel. So offensively, they didn't do great. 172 yards. I thought Oregon's defense was great in this game. They were phenomenal. They got pressure on the quarterback. Jordan Birch was all over the field. Just such a great defensive performance on a team that honestly was overmatched. They overmatched UCLA's defensive line, and I think that is something I wanted to see after performances like Boise State, where it's like, oh man, they're getting run over all the time. They're really struggling against Ashton Gianti. So I wanted to see a dominant defensive performance, and they did 4 sacks on the day. Uyunglele, the brother of the quarterback at Florida State, he had a sack. Jordan Birch had a sack. Jeffrey Bassa had a sack. Just really, really good pressure all night long. And Ethan Garbers, they picked him off twice. They held UCLA rushing to 2 yards a carry. That'll win you a lot of football games. Let me tell you about my concern. Oregon offensively, I thought they started strong, but I thought we saw some of Dylan Gabriel's deficiencies in this game. He wasn't super explosive. He did have the big pass play to Tez Johnson, a 52-yard touchdown pass. Great job there. But other than that, he didn't really show his explosiveness. I think he's a efficient point guard is what I would call Dylan Gabriel. But I don't think he's the player that maybe some people thought he was going to be. I think he's good, but I thought they really bogged down after his interception. And you look at that third quarter, they really slowed down. And if UCLA was able to muster any offense at all, this game might have been a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. Now, I think you could make a similar argument that Oregon knew they could kind of shut it down and kind of milk things because they knew they had UCLA dead to rights. But the reality is they were still trying to score in the fourth quarter with Dylan Gabriel. They had Dylan Gabriel, they had Tez Johnson in with 9 minutes left. They scored a touchdown to make it look a little better than maybe it was. But I think Oregon, I really want to see Oregon and see how they do against stiffer competition now that it seems like they've kind of gotten back. They play Michigan State next week, which I think will actually be a better test for them than UCLA. I think Michigan State is better along the lines. I think they showed that they showed that Saturday against Ohio State. I think Aiden Childs is going to be a better matchup problem against them. He'll probably throw a couple picks, but I think from a talent perspective, Aiden Childs is better than Garbers. So I'm just not sold on Dylan Gabriel as a stud. I think he's really good. I think he's continuing to put up really good numbers, right? 31 to 41, 278 yards, 3 touchdowns. So it's good. But remember, he had a 53-yard touchdown pass, and it still took him 41 attempts to get to 278. That's a little concerning against the defense that, quite honestly, is not very good. So what does that mean? Do I think that Oregon stinks, that they're good? No, I still think they're a top 3 team in the Big Ten. I still think UCLA is – I think there's some improvement. but I still think they're one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. And I think Oregon struggled a bit in this game offensively. So defensively, they were great. Defensively, they were fantastic. But I think there are questions offensively, and I think we're going to have more questions after next week before their game against Ohio State as they take on the Spartans. So might be an upset alert for them. I'm not saying that they'll get upset, but I think Michigan State is better than people think. Just the more I've watched them, I think a lot of their loss to Boston College, I think a lot of that was on the turnovers. But in terms of actual talent and in terms of potential, they might get up and get somebody. And I would not be shocked if maybe Aiden Childs does some things next week against Oregon. So again, ho hum. Oregon was good, not great. Let's go to Ohio State, Michigan. Ohio State went to East Lansing. They win 38-7 on a pair of Jeremiah Smith touchdowns. Let me just start by saying the obvious. Jeremiah Smith's not human. He is the best receiver I maybe have ever seen at Ohio State, and that's saying something. I've watched Ohio State closely more than any other team in the Big Ten. And it feels like hyperbole. I feel stupid for saying it. But he is the best receiver I've seen. And he's not in terms of talent, by the way. I don't mean refinement or anything like I'm just saying pure talent. He's faster, his route running, his size, his speed. I mean, he's running away from people, and you're thinking, well, he's 6'3, 6'4, 215. Like he's trying to be more of a possession guy. No, he's running away from dudes. They're putting him in on an end around to score a rushing touchdown. What the heck is this? He's an alien, man. He is just so good. I mean, that play, and I just want to highlight too, TreVeyon Henderson has not had a massive role yet in this offense. He will, but I think the most carries he's had in a game, I don't know if he's hit double-digit carries in a game thus far. I think, his load, he's had 10 carries once against Western Michigan. He has 31 carries on the season. Remember, this guy was a 1,200-yard back in his freshman season. He just hit 3,000 career rushing yards in his career at Ohio State. He has 31 carries in 4 games. He's going to have a big impact. But I want you to go back, if you have a chance, and watch him pass protect. Because Jeremiah Smith doesn't have his second touchdown, and Emeka Egbuka doesn't have his long touchdown catch if TreVeyon Henderson doesn't pass block. That dude has become a complete back. He has been phenomenal. Now, I want to talk about 2 things with this game. One, Michigan State is better than people realize. I think their lines, I think, are just really good, right? Their lines are much better than I expected. And again, if they didn't turn the ball over so much, they'd be 4-1 and not 5-0. And I think we're talking about a much closer game on Saturday. If you and just to highlight guys, I think it was Jordan Turner who was just, he was all over the field. He had a tackle for loss, 9 tackles overall. There's another guy, and I need to look him up here. But one of the defensive tackles was just really fantastic. And I'm not sure who it was. I feel I should have looked it up beforehand. But in general, their D-line, I thought, played really well. And I thought Ohio State's offensive line, especially their pass blocking, was really good. Like I don't think they were bad by any means, but I thought the line play was good. I thought Michigan State's offensive line played really well. Their backs, particularly in the first half, were really good. Nate Carter had a big run to start the game. So I thought particularly the first half they were pretty good. The second half is a different story. And part of that is that they forced Michigan State to have to throw, so they knew it was coming, and so Ohio State could kind of tee off. So again, I think this is a tale of two halves. I think Michigan State looked really good for stretches of the first half. I think in the second half, Ohio State shut it down. Here's where my concern lies then for Ohio State. They want to be an elite team. They want to beat the Alabamas, the Georgias. They want to win the Big Ten. They want to beat Michigan. That D line's got to get better. That D line is average, and it shouldn't be. This is not an elite defensive line like I saw the first 2 weeks. And I don't know if it's competition or because Tyleik Williams isn't in or what, but that first half and the D line and the defense overall was just average. Davison Igbinosun was a non-factor in this game. And I mean, different receivers were getting open on him. I mean, wide open tight ends, receivers. And granted, they have some good players. Nick Marsh, who I think he was limited in this game, but he had a couple of big plays. Uh, their tight ends had some big plays in this game. Jerron Glover had a big day, 4 catches, 53 yards, a touchdown. The coverage was not very good. Again, box score watchers, you will look at this and be like, well, Michigan State had less than 250 yards and they only scored 7 points. Don't be fooled. Ohio State was average defensively in this game until the second half. Second half, they were lights out. They were phenomenal, and they put their second and third stringers in the entire fourth quarter, which I thought was great. I think it's good for development, despite the score being only 38-7. But I think you have to understand this game probably should have been like 24-20 at the end of the first half, if not for turnovers. And a big part of that is because Ohio State's defense was average and Michigan State was taking advantage of it. I'll say one more thing. Aiden Childs, I saw people on Twitter giving him junk and saying, well, he's saying it's all about potential. That just means he's never going to arrive. Guys, if you're saying that, shut up. The dude's legit. Like, he can play. And I think the more that this team evolves and grows together, I'm not a betting guy. If I were, I would bet that they get at least one, if not two upsets in this next stretch. I just said I think they might put Oregon on upset alert. So just understand the Spartans, Jonathan Smith is doing a heck of a coaching job. And before you're like, well, but all the turnovers, can't he fix that? They're young. This is the reality, is that you've got raw, young players, but they're talented. They have more talent than I thought they would have. I think their win against Maryland bears that out. I think their near win against Boston College bears that out. And I think the way they played in the first half against Ohio State bears that out. This is a team, I would not be shocked if they pull off one or two upsets in the next few weeks. And this next stretch is brutal for them. But watch out. If anyone's playing the Spartans, watch out. That's my advice to you. Let's go to Indiana, Maryland. And I think Indiana played maybe the worst game they could have played. I thought Rourke, I called it. Rourke, 2 picks. And they were both in the first quarter. It was like he heard my podcast and he's like, Zach, I'm going to throw these in terrible spots for you just to prove your listeners right, or prove to your listeners you're right. But I thought there were times where their run defense was not sound, was not gap sound. I thought there were times that Rourke really forced things, and yet they still won by 14. They won by 14 despite the fact that Maryland had 0 turnovers and Indiana had 4. And let's be clear, it was 42-21. And then Maryland scored with, 2 minutes left in the ball game, 3 minutes left in the ball game. Indiana outgained Maryland by over 100 yards. Curtis Rourke was, he, aside from the picks, man, 22 of 33, 359 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's averaging over 10 yards a clip. That's like close to actually it's close to 11 yards per attempt. The running game was good. Not great, but I think that's something that I wanted to see is, can this team run the ball? And they did. Like Lawton, 19 carries, 93 yards and a touchdown. The receivers, Elijah Surratt, man, that dude is, he is physical. He's got an attitude. Just really, really good. And despite the fact that they allowed 400 yards, just remember they're playing against one of the better receiving cores in the country in Felton, in Prather. Prather had a good day, but they held Felton in check. Ty Felton, 5 catches, only 38 yards. So they took him out of the game for the most part. They allowed Roman Hendy to run, but outside of a 75-yard run, here's I think the key stat. Outside of a 75-yard run, they had only, let me do math here, 37 yards. So 29 carries, 37 yards, and then a 75-yard touchdown run by Hemby. So that was a mistake, right? That was a mistake. But other than that, I thought Indiana acquitted themselves quite well against what can be a good offense. And they committed 4 turnovers and still essentially blew Maryland out. Now, granted, it was close until the fourth quarter, but it wasn't close in the fourth quarter. And I think the reality is Indiana was a much better team than Maryland. I think we're seeing that Indiana is no joke. Indiana's 5-0. I just want to do an exercise with you. This is their schedule. They play at Northwestern. That'll be, at Northwestern might be a little tough, but I think they win that game. They host Nebraska. They host Washington. I think both those games are toss-ups. At Michigan State's a toss-up. Then they host Michigan. I think that's a toss-up. Then they get a bye. And then they go on the road to Ohio State. And they play Purdue at home. Are we looking down the barrel of Indiana being a 10-win team this year? Because I'll be honest, if you put a gun to my head and you said, who's winning Nebraska, who's winning Indiana or Northwestern? I'm saying Indiana for that one easily. Indiana versus Nebraska, I might pick Indiana. Indiana versus Washington, I might pick Indiana. Indiana at Michigan State, probably picking Indiana. Michigan, Indiana, I don't know. I might pick Indiana for that one, depending on how they look. Against Purdue, I'm picking Indiana. Now, I don't know if they have the depth to avoid the letdown or to if they get injuries. But listen, are we looking at a possible playoff team in the Hoosiers? I don't know, with this schedule and with some of the other teams losing in the national scope, I don't know, man. They're playing really well. And I especially offensively. Now, and I know Maryland's defense isn't great. They were, turnover happy and they got a bunch of turnovers. But man, they have just put it on teams. I'm excited to see them play against Northwestern, who I think does have a good defense. But man, this is an explosive team with good receivers, good running backs, and I think a quarterback who, despite his mistakes, again, continues to show that he is one of the best quarterbacks in this league. I think Maryland, if I'm Maryland, I'm obviously concerned because typically in any given year, you look at Indiana as a win. You got to beat Northwestern next week or not in 2 weeks. They get a bye. And then, if you want to hit a bowl game, you've got to get Minnesota and you got to hope that you can beat one of USC, Oregon, Rutgers, Iowa, and Penn State. and get an upset there. Because otherwise, you're talking about maybe you're talking about 5-7, 4-8, and that really dashes the hopes of the type of program that Mike Locksley was trying to build. So they have a rough road ahead, right? It was always going to be backloaded, but I think when we first looked at the season, I think we expected them to beat Michigan State and we expected them to beat Indiana, and they did not. So this is going to be a tough road. I think Northwestern, they better hope they win. At Minnesota, they better hope they win because USC, Oregon, Rutgers, Iowa, Penn State, I don't know if I see a win there. Maybe against Rutgers. I think they can get Rutgers because of the style of play. But even that, with the strength of Rutgers' team, I think being their back seven and their secondary, I don't know. It's a tough road, and I don't think the issue is the quarterback. I think Billy Edwards has been playing lights out, but I think the defense has been kind of feast or famine. I think the run game has stunk. I think their offensive line has not been great. So, tough road ahead. Let's go to Nebraska, Purdue. Man, I don't know what to make of this game. I watched it. I think Nebraska was a little flat after the loss to Illinois, and that matters. And I think I just don't understand. Like sometimes it kind of feels like Nebraska doesn't stick with the running game like they should. I also don't understand some of the Henrik Heinberg stuff. And maybe if there's a Nebraska fan in the chat or in the comments wants to tell me like why Harburg sometimes is lining up at quarterback. Like, listen, I get it. Raiola is a freshman. You want to like have different looks and whatnot. Can I just make a suggestion to Matt Rule? Don't overthink it. Let your quarterback be your quarterback. There's a reason why Henrik Harburg is not your starter. Like, stop running him. Stop doing this like special play stuff. Like, let Raiola play, and then run your offense. They were flat. I thought Hudson Card looked a little better for Purdue. That's not saying much. I mean, Purdue, though, from a penalty standpoint, I I I just don't understand, and I don't know how. I don't know how Ryan Walters keeps his job at the end of this year. Just the amount, and I get a lot of the penalties were on underthrows for pass interference calls. I get that. But like this secondary was supposed to be like the strength of this defense. And I mean, they keep committing penalties. They keep allowing big plays. And I just ugh. Neither team was clean. Neither team was clean. Nebraska had 11 penalties for 94 yards, including a unsportsmanlike conduct against Matt Rule. But man, I don't know how you as a team can have that many. I'm trying to find the amount of penalty yardage and I can't find it. But it was well over 100 yards for Purdue. I think it was over 150 penalty yards for Purdue. It's insane. You can't win games that way. Like you just can't. And I don't know like how Purdue prepared, but it just feels like they're unprepared and undisciplined every week. And while like Hudson Card was okay, he's still not the quarterback that I thought he'd be. Oh, I just saw that. I see the penalty yardage now. 13 for 165. If I just look at just look a little closer. Like 13 penalties for 165 yards. I mean, that's insane. They can't run the ball. 1.7 yards per carry. They threw an interception. I mean, it just in every way, Purdue got outclassed again. And it looks more respectable because Nebraska didn't score till the second half because they were flat and they missed field goals. But the reality is Nebraska was superior to them in every way. Purdue has a lot of soul searching to do. But if you're a Nebraska fan, I would just warn you, you got to hope that this doesn't happen again next week against Rutgers, because Rutgers will punch you in the mouth and you'll be down 14-0 quick. So Nebraska is lucky. It was 21-10, and then they got a pick six. This was not, from a score perspective, Purdue was in it till the end, regardless of the score, regardless of the yardage differential. And so understand this was a rough outing for Nebraska, and they have got to do a better job as they return home against the Scarlet Knights. Otherwise, they're going to get beat again. So, again, it's a good Rutgers team. It really is. Let's move to let's get to 3 games left. Let's go to Wisconsin USC. Wisconsin against number 13 USC. Now I believe USC is number 11 in the AP poll. This was just an odd game, and I think USC, they turned the ball over a couple times in the first half, and so Wisconsin was able to get a bit of a lead, right? You had the 63-yard pass from Braden Locke. You had a couple of big runs from Towie Walker, 18-yard run, 4-yard run, got it to 21-10, and you're thinking, oh man, like this is Wisconsin could do something here. Like Wisconsin's playing pretty well. Now all of a sudden in the second half, it was all USC. USC adjusted. Miller Moss just was phenomenal. 2 touchdowns through the air, 1 on the ground in the second half. And then Wisconsin just had no offense. And again, the offense in the second half in particular just sputtered. And a lot of his Braden Locke's not ready. Braden Locke had a good first half, and then he was not ready to take on in the second half. If you look at the second half and their drives, first drive, -7 yards. And then they muff a punt. So then USC gets the ball back. So -7 yards, muffed punt, 47 yards and a turnover on downs, 3 yards, 16 yards, and then an interception touchdown on a drive that took 2 yards, and then 6 yards on downs. So if you total that up, how many yards do they get in the second half? Less than 100. And actually, I can do this fairly easily. It's 40, 43, 59, 61, 67. And they had, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6 drives. 6 drives, they average 11 yards a drive. And 47 of those came on 1. It's so bad in Madison right now that former Wisconsin players are calling out and saying, you guys got to go back to the power I. Something's wrong with the culture. I've been saying it. I don't love it, but Fickle's not the guy. Now, let me talk about USC for a minute. And this, I think USC and Michigan are tied because of the game last week. And I'll talk about Michigan in a minute. USC and Michigan are not as good as the rankings suggest. Right? They shouldn't, if they're an elite team, they shouldn't be struggling with Wisconsin. But the reality is Wisconsin came out with their hair on fire. And if they hadn't shot themselves in the foot, this game's a lot closer, right? It's 38-21. It's 21-10 at half. If they don't muff a punt, if they don't throw a pick six, if they don't turn over on downs, like this is a team that actually might have upset USC if they had played a clean second half, regardless of how bad they were offensively. If they just avoid turnovers, this game is probably a lot closer, if not an upset. USC is lucky. Now, I think part of that luck is self-generated, right? Like you sometimes you create your own luck. Danton Lynn, I don't want anyone to hear me say this and be like, well, Danton Lynn isn't doing anything. Danton Lynn's done a great job. He has made them much better on defense, much better on defense. But again, you have to realize that this team, they're a mid-tier. They're like in that 4 to 10 range in the Big Ten. They are not in the top three, and there's a big drop off after three. There really is, and you have to understand if you're a Trojans fan, it's. I think Penn State, Penn State going on the road to them, that's going to be a tough road, or that's going to be a tough one. But they have a chance because Penn State goes on the road. They typically don't do well on the road. But I think you have to understand that USC still has they have a lot of warts that they're covering up with a really good quarterback and a really good receiving game. Jacoby Lane, great game, 2 touchdowns. Miller Moss, one of the best quarterbacks in the conference, easily. Woody Marks playing really well. But this team has to continue to progress, particularly on the lines. I keep saying it. I think, I think they have a tough game against Minnesota next week. And I don't think Minnesota's great, but I think seeing what Minnesota was able to do against Michigan, like you have to understand, Minnesota's going to want to run the ball, and I think they will. I think they'll be able to throw the ball on them. And I think where the downfall will be is that I think USC can throw all over the yard, whereas Michigan can't. So I still like USC to win and beat Minnesota, but just understand, like USC still has some warts on that defensive side of the ball, and I think Wisconsin, they're just not. I don't think you can expect a bowl game. I think Braden Locke is what it is. He's not a Big Ten caliber quarterback. And I don't say that to be mean. I just don't think he's got it. And that's after seeing him for 2 years now. So great guy. Good to have him as a backup. But you don't want him as your starter. So let's move to the little brown jug. Oh boy, we're going to talk about controversy. Before I get to controversy, let me just say this. I don't say a lot of nice things about PJ Fleck. I'll say something nice about him here. They hung in this game. They could have easily packed it in 21 nothing. End of the first half. They go for the field goal, and they're able to get 3 points at the end. I think that this team showed a lot of resolve and showed a lot of desperation. And I thought generally down the stretch, I thought they played really well. Darius Taylor fought hard. They outgained Michigan 296 to 241. A couple of unfortunate errors, right? You had the fumble by Daniel Jackson in the first half that led to really maybe a 10 or 14 point swing the other way. They had the 27-yard Khalil or all the running yards that they allowed to Michigan, I believe. Yeah, like it's just. Sorry, I'm trying to collect my thoughts here. I think Minnesota blew some opportunities in the first half, but they were solid in the second half. Brosmer, I thought, played well. I thought the defense for Minnesota really keyed in on Michigan, and they only allowed 6 points, 3 points apiece in the second half quarters, and so I thought they did a good job. And while Khalil Mullings had a couple of big runs, right, they held him under 5 yards a carry. So I think Minnesota actually played well enough to win in the second half. The problem is it was the unforced errors in the first half. And you got to give credit to Michigan there, right? Defensive line made things really difficult for Brosmer and for Daniel Jackson. Like Daniel Jackson, they stripped that ball from him. He as a captain, as a leader on this team, he can't do you can't fumble the ball there. But you also got to give credit to Michigan, right? So props to Michigan for holding on. Props to Minnesota for fighting back. I think that was a good thing for Minnesota. I think Michigan, I think if you are a Michigan fan, you have to be concerned because while Alex Orji did have, I thought they developed a little bit of a passing game for him that was effective in spurts, right? He's still only 10 of 18 for 86 yards, right? Less than 5 yards an attempt, less than 100 yards passing total. I think the running, like once Minnesota could say, hey, we're just going to pin our ears back and go, they kind of withheld them. And even then, at times they played with a light box, which was a little odd. But here's the thing is that Michigan knows who they are now and they're building on their offense. And so I do think they are a little bit more of a wild card in this league. Remember, they're 2-0 in conference. I think next week against Washington is going to be very fascinating to see. Will Washington just kind of pin their ears back and see if Alex Orji can beat them with his arm? Because they do that. I think Washington can win that game in Seattle. Interesting matchup there. Let me address the controversy. The controversy was this. There was an offsides call on the onside kick where Minnesota recovered with a chance to either tie or take the lead. I forget. I think it was less than 2 minutes left in the game. Yeah, so a minute 30 something left in the game. And the line judge, I believe it was the line judge, called an offsides on, I forget which person it was, but they called an offsides. And you go back and look at it. And I think some people were like, oh, he barely was offsides. Other people were saying he wasn't offsides at all. Some people are saying you don't call offsides in that situation because it's a big play in a game and you can't let that dictate a win. Other people are like, of course you call that, of course, depending on who you root for, probably depends on what you think. My take on it is this. One, Minnesota, don't rely on that to win a ball game. Like, don't be in a position where an official can dictate whether you win or lose a game. I know Minnesota fans don't want to hear that, but the reality is you didn't show up till 2 seconds left in the first half. You got to blame at some point you got to blame yourselves for that. We said this, what we talk about Iowa, Minnesota and all that stuff a year ago, but the reality is you can't complain about the refs. I think the way I think about it is this. I think from the TV copy, I don't think he was offsides. But I didn't see a down the line shot. And I wasn't down the line like the official is. And I get the whole argument that in this spot in a game, you don't call something unless it's egregious. But I get blue in the face talking about replay and how replay can only overturn something if it's indisputable evidence. I think I would be inconsistent in saying you don't call, if it's a big moment in a game, you don't call something unless it's egregious. I think if that line judge saw him cross the neutral zone or the line of scrimmage, he has an obligation to throw that flag. As much as it stinks, he has an obligation to do it. And so I didn't see down the line. I saw a TV copy, which maybe is down the line, maybe is not. I didn't see it, but I'm not that official. I also get people were tagging me post game this crew is terrible. There are some Big Ten crews that are terrible. I don't think you can nail them for that call. I think it was a tough call. I think it's one of those calls where you're like, yeah, maybe not. I don't know. At the end of the day, you got to live with it. And, Minnesota turned the ball over twice. They had every ability to really be ahead in this game and not have to do an onside kick. It stinks. I'm gutted for the players. And it was a great execution and all that stuff, except for the offsides. Again, I didn't think it was offsides, but I'm not the line judge. I wasn't just staring down the line. And so I think it was close. It was close. And I think if he thought somebody crossed the line of scrimmage, you got to call that. Like if the shoe were on the other foot, I think you would say, yeah, I'd want that called. So I think I think it's a very hard decision, and we don't know because we aren't down the line. So that's my thought. Let me just go lastly to the biggest game, I think. Illinois, Penn State. I finally picked Illinois to lose where they actually lost. I'm sorry, Illini fans. I thought I was doing you a solid by picking them to lose. Uh, this game was not as close as the score said. And I don't say that to malign Illinois because I think Illinois is really good. I think Altmaier was a big reason why they were in the game until late. But if you again, I think Penn State missed several field goals. They made a couple of decisions on fourth down to go for it where they probably didn't need to. And they still won 21-7. Now the game kind of played out the way I thought it would, right? Like it was close all throughout, and then Penn State iced it with a minute 55 left. It's kind of how I thought it was going to play out. I thought it was going to be close throughout. But I think Penn State was dominant on the lines. They were just very good on the lines. You know, you look at the box score, just look at the running stats. Penn State, 43 carries, 241 yards, 5.6 yards a carry. Illinois, 32 carries, 34 yards. Now, some of that was sack yardage. I get that. But man, this was a dominant performance. Abdul Carter, 2 sacks. Kobe King, a sack. Zane Durant, a sack. Tony Rojas, half a sack. Denai Dennis Sutton, a sack. This Penn State D line is for real. And I know Kobe King's not a Kobe King and Rojas, they're not D linemen, but my point remains: this defense is legit. They're really, really good, and it's a credit to Penn State's defense that they won by double digits and they held Illinois to 7, because I think Illinois has a good quarterback. They have good receivers. But man, their D line was, I mean, they wrecked them. And this is the reality. Penn State right now is the second best team in the Big Ten. And I'm not so sure that it's a significant difference between them and Ohio State right now. I'll tell you right now, I would take Penn State's D line over Ohio State's. Now, that's without Tyleik Williams in. Tyleik makes a world of difference. But this defensive line is nasty, guys. It is. And nobody on their schedule except for Ohio State right now, I think, has the ability to stop them. Like you go down the line and you look at their schedule and the rest of the way. They get UCLA next week. Then they travel to USC. And then they go to Wisconsin. I think that D line is going to wreck all 3 of those teams. Washington, I think, might be a decent challenge. But then they get Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland. Buckle up, boys. This D line is going to wreck some people. And the only team that I think is going to be able to match up well, and I'm not even sure about this, is Ohio State. And I like whether it's Abdul Carter or Denai Dennis Sutton, whoever lines up over Josh Fryer, I like that matchup for Penn State. So what does this mean? Well, I think for Penn State, I think their path to the playoff is just rock solid. Now, I will say one thing. I do think Drew Aller showed a bit of his weaknesses in this game, right? Only 135 yards passing. Tap dance a little bit too much, throwing off his back foot, some massive underthrows. I thought there were times he just did, like, he looked like sophomore Drew Aller, right? That could come back to bite him, especially against Ohio State. But man, when you got a running game like that and you've got a D line like that, that cures a lot of ills. cures a lot of ills. I think they can win a lot of rock fights in the Big Ten. Illinois, I think for them, for one, I don't think they should hang their heads, right? I think Penn State's a top 7, top 8 team in the country, right? And I think Illinois is a top 20 team in the country. So they have, I think, a bye week and then Purdue to kind of get right before a pretty rough stretch, Michigan at Oregon. And then I think probably a stretch that kind of defines their season, which is Minnesota, Michigan State, at Rutgers, at Northwestern. I think from Illinois to see this as a successful season, they got to win 3 out of 4, if not all 4 of those. I think 3 out of 4. I think that Rutgers game really is a toss-up with them, and I think Michigan State is probably more of a toss-up than people want to admit. But I think they beat Purdue. That gets them at 5-1, and I think Michigan's a toss-up. Right? And maybe even Oregon, although I think Oregon is probably more in the range of Penn State. But the reality is this loss, I don't think means a ton for Illinois. Like, I think they have their goals still out in front of them, which is, be a dark horse playoff contender and maybe get to 9-10 wins. I think they certainly get to a bowl game. Like, and I think, talking with Ryan from Keeping It Orange and Blue, he said that's the bar before the season. I think they're going to clear that bar easily. And big reason why, Altmaier, Bryant, Franklin, that defense, they're going to make life a nightmare for a lot of teams. And I think that includes Michigan. I think that includes Oregon. I think those are going to be tough games. I think it's going to be a tough game for Rutgers when they play Illinois. So nothing bad to say about Illinois other than I think they ran up against potentially elite team in the country and got beat. And that happens. So I've gone way longer than I expected. Let me do my power rankings real quick, and then we will do my playoff bracket, which saw some movement. Let's do power rankings first. Purdue, dead last. Northwestern, 17. UCLA, 16. Wisconsin, 15. Minnesota, 14. Maryland, 13. Michigan State, 12. Washington, 11. None of that changed from a week ago. Because quite honestly, I didn't really see anything that made me think those teams should shift. Like, I think you could make a case for Michigan State and Washington flipping, but I think you got to give credit to Washington keeping it close with Rutgers, and I think Jonah Cole, they have pieces that the other teams don't. Right? I think same thing with Michigan State. I think Aiden Childs, once he figures it out, elevates them above everybody else. So I like that order for those teams. 10, I dropped Iowa. I think, and part of that is we're going to get a good look at Iowa next week against Ohio State. And I think Iowa's had one good performance, one maybe more complete performance, and that was the second half against Minnesota. I want to see more. I think that game against Ohio State is going to actually be really helpful to understand what both teams are, or who both teams are. 9, I have Nebraska. 8, I bumped Rutgers from 10 to 8. I think you got to give credit, one, for them holding a 2-score lead over Washington for much of the game, but then also they beat Virginia Tech on the road, and Virginia Tech took Miami to the limit. They probably should have beat Miami. That's a call that I will go to war on, far more so than the offsides call, because the officials legitimately got that wrong. So good job, officials. Way to let Miami continue to believe that they are a contender for the playoff. Good job. I guess I really can't talk about Miami that way as an Ohio State guy, but alas, I will. Illinois, 7. I don't think you can punish them for losing to Penn State. I just think you can't. And I honestly, I don't know whether to put Illinois and Rutgers above USC and Michigan. I have them below them, but I have USC and Michigan 6 and 5 respectively. Here's my big jump of the week. Indiana at 4. Now it might be it might be a little premature. And I admit that. I admit that. But I think it was telling that they played what I thought was their worst game of the season by far and still was up 42-21 with 3 minutes left in the game against Maryland. They had the best game against UCLA out of LSU and Oregon and them, which I think is telling. I think Curtis Rourke is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think their defense is better than people are giving it credit for. I think their offensive line is better than they're giving it credit for. I think their running game is better than they're giving it credit. People are giving credit for. This Indiana team's really good. And I wouldn't be surprised if they drop at some point and they lose a couple games that they might be favored in. But I just want you to realize I think Indiana is for real. Kurt Cignetti is doing a heck of a job easily. I think between him and Brett Bielema, those two are easily the top two candidates for Big Ten Coach of the Year. Number 3, I slide Oregon down. Again, I just think they look like they're lacking something. I think their offensive line has been good. I think Dylan Gabriel's been good. I think their defense played really well against an overmatched opponent. I think we're gonna see more of who Oregon is next week against Michigan State, if I'm honest. So I've got Oregon 3. I think Penn State's 2, and I think Ohio State is 1. But I'm skeptical about this D line, and I think we're gonna find out a lot as they face Caleb Johnson and I think a pretty good Iowa offensive line. We're gonna see how well they do stopping the run. My playoff bracket, number 1, Texas. I know Alabama just beat Georgia. I still think Texas is the better team. Of Ohio State 2, Miami 3. I really wish I could just kind of give a mulligan to the Big 12 because it seems like nobody wants to win that league right now. I'll give it to BYU because they're undefeated and they beat K-State last week. But I don't feel confident at all. I don't have another Big 12 team making it. Like, I think Iowa State is undefeated. I think they'll lose to somebody. I think they're just going to beat each other up. And I just don't think you're going to have anybody who actually warrants a second bid. So, but right now, BYU is the flavor of the week in the Big 12. Alabama easily the 5 seed right now. I think their win over Georgia, puts them in that seat. I'm at this point, I'm just saying that they're going to lose the SEC championship game. So I think they'll be 5. I think 6 is Tennessee. 7, I have Penn State. 8, I have Oregon. 9, I have Clemson. 10, I have Georgia. Georgia in, even though they lost. I think the fact that Ole Miss just lost to Kentucky, Missouri hasn't looked good, and I just don't think the playoff committee is gonna leave Georgia out, even if they're like 9-3 with their schedule. I think because of their schedule, because of their cachet, I think if you've got a 10-2 Big 12 team up against them or a 10-2 ACC team, I think Georgia's going to get in. So I got Georgia at 10, and my surprise team at 11 right now, the Indiana Hoosiers. I think they end up either 10-2 or 11-1 right now, the way they're playing. And number 12, I still have Boise State, although I will say UNLV continues to look very, very promising. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate you guys. I'm sorry if I was a little slow on this episode. I'm been a long week, good week, but long week and just a little tired, not firing on all cylinders, but grateful for you listening. Again, make sure to like, subscribe. Journey to 300. 16 of you subscribe. Please do that. And also make sure you share, like, really appreciate you all. Stay tuned on Thursday for week 6 picks. Until then, take care and God bless.